Welcome back to the dawn of Christianity, a deep dive into the first century and the early papacy. Last time we navigated the political storms of the Roman Empire in the first century, from the Julio-Claudian emperors to the Jewish War, which shaped the world where Christianity took root. Today, we're diving into the heart of our story, the early popes. These were the first leaders of the Christian community in Rome, figures who laid the foundations of the papacy in a world of persecution, cultural upheaval, and growing faith. It's a tale of courage, leadership, and a new kind of authority emerging in the shadow of empire. So let's step into the first century streets of Rome, where a fledgling faith was finding its voice. Let's start with the idea of the papacy itself. In the first century, there wasn't a pope in the way we think of today. No Grand Vatican, no white robes. Instead, Christian leadership was fluid, centered on figures called bishops, presbyters, and deacons. Bishops were overseers guiding communities, while presbyters were elders and deacons handled practical needs like charity. In Rome, a city buzzing with trade and ideas, Christians were a small, often secretive group, meeting in homes or hidden spaces. The idea of a single leader, a pope, grew from a key moment in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus calls Peter the rock on which he'll build his church. This concept of apostolic succession, that leaders inherited authority from the apostles, gave the early church a sense of continuity. Rome, as the empire's capital and a hub for Peter's ministry, started to emerge as a center of Christian authority, even if it was still a loose, evolving idea. Now, let's meet the first popes, starting with Peter himself, who tradition holds was the first bishop of Rome from around 30 to 64 or 67 AD. Peter's story is one of transformation, from a Galilean fisherman to a leader who carried Jesus' message from Jerusalem to Rome. In Jerusalem, he was a pillar of the early church, preaching alongside James and John. By the 50s or 60s, he's in Rome, guiding a growing Christian community. But Rome under Nero was no safe haven. In 64 AD, after the Great Fire, Nero scapegoated Christians, unleashing a wave of persecution. Tradition tells us Peter was crucified upside down, feeling unworthy to die like Jesus. His martyrdom cemented his legacy as the foundation of the Roman Church. After Peter comes Linus, traditionally listed as Pope from around 67 to 76 AD. Linus is a shadowy figure. History doesn't give us much to work with. The Bible mentions a Linus in 2 Timothy, possibly the same person, but details are scarce. He likely led a small, embattled community, organizing worship and charity under the radar of Roman authorities. Persecution wasn't constant, but Christians were vulnerable, meeting in the house churches to avoid attention. Linus's role was less about grand authority and more about survival, keeping the fledgling faith alive in a city that could turn hostile at any moment. Next is Anacletus, or Cletus, who served from around 76 to 88 AD. Again, records are thin, but he's credited with strengthening the Roman Church as it grew. By now, Christians were starting to stand out from their Jewish roots, especially after the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple in 70 AD. Anacletus likely faced the challenge of defining what it meant to be Christian in a city of temples and emperor worship. His leadership helped the community hold together, even as it navigated Roman suspicion and internal debates about how to live out their faith. Then we come to Clement I, Pope from around 88 to 97 AD, a figure who gives us a clearer glimpse of early papal authority. Clement is famous for a letter he wrote to the church in Corinth, known as First Clement. The Corinthian Christians were squabbling, even ousting their leaders, and Clement stepped in, urging unity and respect for authority. What's striking is that Corinth wasn't his turf, Rome was. Yet his letter carried weight, showing that Rome's bishop was starting to be seen as a voice of guidance beyond his own city. Clement's writing blends Jewish tradition, Greek rhetoric, and Christian teaching, urging the Corinthians to live humbly and faithfully. He didn't call himself Pope, but his actions hint at a growing sense of Rome's role as a stabilizing force in the scattered Christian world. These early popes faced enormous challenges. Persecution was a constant threat. Nero's crackdown in the 60s set a grim precedent, and under Domitian in the 80s and 90s, Christians faced sporadic harassment for refusing to honor the emperor as divine. Meeting in secret, often in catacombs or private homes, Christians had to balance survival with spreading their message. Then there were tensions with Jewish communities, especially after 70 AD, when the temple's destruction deepened the split between Jews and Christians. Christians were increasingly seen as a separate group, which made them more vulnerable to Roman scrutiny. Internally, the early church wasn't all harmony either. Disputes over theology, like how to interpret Jesus' teachings or whether to follow Jewish laws, threatened to fracture communities. Leaders like Clement worked to keep these diverse groups united, laying down principles of order and faith. The Greco-Roman and Jewish worlds shaped these early leaders in profound ways. Rome's political structure, with its centralized authority, influenced how the church organized itself. Bishops like Peter and Clement adopted a model of leadership that echoed Roman governance, with one figure guiding the community. Greek philosophy, especially ideas like the Logos or Stoic ethics, seeped into Christian thought, helping leaders explain their faith to a wider audience. Jewish roots were just as crucial. Christian worship, with its prayers and communal meals, drew heavily from synagogue practices. The Eucharist, for instance, echoed Jewish rituals of breaking bread, even as it took on new meaning. This blend of influences, Roman order, Greek ideas, Jewish tradition, gave the early popes a framework to build a faith that could endure. As we wrap up, let's reflect on what these early popes achieved. In a world of emperors and armies, they were nobodies, leaders of a small, often persecuted sect. Yet Peter, Linus, Anacletus, and Clement laid the groundwork for something extraordinary. They gave the church in Rome a sense of purpose and continuity, turning it into a beacon for Christians across the empire. Their leadership wasn't about power, but about service, holding together a faith under pressure from all sides. The papacy, still in its infancy, was becoming a symbol of unity, a rock in a stormy world. Next time, we'll explore how this young faith expressed itself through art. From catacomb frescoes to symbols of hope, we'll see how early Christians used images to tell their story in a world that often rejected them. Until then, picture yourself in a Roman house church, hearing Clement's letter read aloud, feeling the quiet strength of a faith that's just beginning to transform history.